In the almost palpable silence of the early morning at St. Mary's Hospital, Emily Carter, 32, adjusted her mask as she walked down the empty ICU corridor. A dedicated nurse used to the night shift, she carried the exhaustion of weeks without a break in her eyes, but also the calm of someone who masters chaos. The routine seemed to be following its usual course, until a chill ran down her spine, a subtle but persistent feeling. Suddenly, the fluorescent lights flickered, and the constant hum of the vital monitors seemed to fade, as if time itself were slowing down. Emily stopped. Her eyes fixed on the weak, trembling light above the monitors, and a strange cold crept over her. Then the vision took hold, vivid and inescapable. She saw herself standing in the ICU plunged into total darkness. The monitors silent, the life support machines dead. Patients motionless, connected to tubes and wires that no longer responded. Muffled screams echoed through the halls, while darkness spread like a threatening cloak. And in the middle of that chaos, the image of a colleague falling, desperate, trying to restart a generator. Emily woke with a start, heart racing, breath heavy. The clock read 3:17 a.m. Around her, everything was normal, or at least it seemed so. She tried to shake off the feeling, but couldn't ignore the urgency growing inside her. The next morning, as she prepared for her shift, the image of that blackout haunted her. Determined, Emily knew she had to warn someone, to prepare the hospital for the worst. But deep down, a darker fear was growing. What if it wasn't just a technical failure? What if something bigger was about to happen? When the lights finally began to fail, Emily felt, with the weight of inevitability, that something far darker than she imagined was already lurking. Emily could no longer ignore the feeling that had consumed her since that night. Early in her shift, she sought out the hospital supervisor, Mrs. Harris, a pragmatic woman in her 50s known for her calm under pressure. With a steady voice, Emily explained the vision of the blackout in the ICU, describing every detail with the urgency she felt. A total blackout, machines shutting down, patients at risk, Emily spoke, trying not to sound desperate. We need a full check on the generators, the backup batteries. We have to be prepared. Mrs. Harris frowned, sighed, and replied, Emily, I understand your concern, but the hospital already follows strict protocols for power emergencies. I'll have the technical team review everything, but we can't panic over a vision. Still, Emily felt the weight of responsibility and didn't stop there. During her rounds, she visited every ICU room, talking to colleagues like Mark, the maintenance technician, and Sarah, a young nurse fresh out of training. Some looked at her sympathetically, others skeptically, especially when she mentioned her premonition. The day went on, and despite the technical team's efforts, no faults were found. The monitors worked normally, and the electrical system seemed stable. But a growing discomfort overwhelmed Emily, as minutes passed with an inexplicable anxiety. That same day, local news reported a short circuit at a nearby hospital that caused a temporary blackout in the emergency wing. No casualties, but enough to rekindle Emily's fear. The news showed scenes of staff rushing to handle the failure, reminding her of the images from her premonition. Mark, who had initially doubted her, remarked, "These things happen. It's no reason to panic. Just a coincidence." But Emily couldn't convince herself. That night, tension in the ICU was palpable. The constant hum of the machines felt like a reminder of what might happen. She felt as if something was watching her, maybe a warning, maybe fate closing in. When the lights began to flicker again, Emily held her breath, aware that the moment of truth was near. Her heart raced, but it wasn't just fear that gripped her. It was the certainty that the fight to save lives was about to begin, and that death, merciless, was already plotting its path. The hours slipped by in the ICU of St. Mary's Hospital, the atmosphere thick with an almost suffocating tension. Emily carried the heavy weight of anticipation, but nothing could have prepared her for the shock that awaited that night. Around 2 a.m., the monitor in room 7 suddenly blared an urgent alarm, slicing through the quiet like a scream. The patient, a frail elderly man named Mr. Collins, battling a severe pneumonia for days, lay pale and motionless. The staff rushed to his side, hearts pounding, only to find the respiratory support machine eerily silent, unexplainably powered down. Mark, the maintenance technician who had been skeptical until then, frantically tried to reboot the equipment, but the power simply refused to respond. Emily felt a cold shiver race down her spine as she realized the entire wing systems had temporarily failed. Mr. Collins' body went into cardiac arrest. The team launched emergency resuscitation attempts, but the lack of power compromised every effort. In that haunting darkness, more than a mere technical failure, he slipped away. The following morning, official reports labeled the incident a rare electrical overload, an isolated accident. But Emily, consumed by anguish and a growing dread, sensed something more sinister lurking beneath the surface. Over the next hours, other patients in neighboring wards began experiencing strange malfunctions. Sudden drops in blood pressure, monitors sounding alarms with no clear cause, vital equipment shutting down for brief but critical moments. Each event seemed to weave into the last, an unspoken chain of silent disasters that no one else seemed to notice, or chose to ignore. Sarah, the young nurse still wrestling with the team's skepticism, whispered nervously to Emily during a brief moment alone, "Do you really think death is hunting us?" Emily didn't answer. She felt the pattern taking shape before her eyes, the dark shadow of fate tightening its grip around them all. The creeping certainty settled like ice in her veins. Death was no longer just a distant threat. It had already made its first victim. And it was only the beginning. Emily spent the next hours lost in a whirlwind of thoughts. Every new incident seemed to fit into a macabre puzzle only she could see. There was a pattern. An invisible order guiding death in its silent dance through the ICU. With Sarah's help, who was beginning to believe her, Emily took notes in a worn notebook, each failure, every machine that stopped, every patient facing an unexpected crisis. She tried to piece together the sequence, the timeline that would reveal who would be next. Meanwhile, the hospital went about its routine, unaware of the drama unfolding. The administration limited itself to technical repairs and superficial explanations, while Emily felt something much greater was at stake. As the hours passed, tension grew. The patients' faces seemed like threatening shadows, and the monitor's beeps vibrated like a constant warning. Emily felt death's invisible gaze in every corner, a presence that seemed to toy with them before delivering the final blow. That night brought another tragedy. In room 3, a young patient named Lisa, diagnosed with a severe heart condition, had her heart monitor suddenly stop. The team rushed to save her, but again, the equipment failed at the most crucial moments. Emily tried to warn the doctors but was dismissed. A feeling of helplessness consumed her as she watched Lisa's life slip away slowly before her eyes. Why is this happening? Emily whispered to herself, desperation growing. Why can't we stop it? Sarah, standing beside her, tried to comfort her. Maybe it's something beyond our control, something beyond our understanding. But Emily knew she had to act. She knew the pattern was there, waiting for her to see it. And to save whoever she could, she would have to face whatever invisible force was threatening them. The ICU clock stopped for a moment. The silence became deafening. Emily stared at the darkened monitors, feeling death already plotting its next move. And she was running out of time. Desperate to understand what was happening, Emily plunged into a frantic investigation. She spent hours sifting through medical records, maintenance logs, incident reports, and even old news articles about unexplained hospital failures. With Sarah by her side, she searched for patterns not only within the hospital but in others across the region. They found similar cases, sudden blackouts, vital equipment failures, sudden and unexplained deaths that had never received enough attention. Each discovery fueled their fear but also strengthened their resolve. Whatever was attacking the ICU was no ordinary technical problem, it seemed like an invisible force, a relentless entity. They tried to break the cycle. Emily suggested swapping shifts among staff, relocating patients to different wards, and testing and replacing machines more frequently. For a brief moment, it seemed these measures helped. The chain of failures paused, as if the danger had retreated. But the peace was only temporary. In a quiet early morning, another patient, Mrs. Thompson, suffered a sudden drop in blood pressure. Despite all efforts, the equipment failed again, and she died within minutes. Panic gripped the ICU. The medical team was on the verge of collapse, and Emily felt the weight of despair in every gaze. "We're running out of time," she said firmly, though fear threatened to take over. "If we don't find the source of this, there will be no more victims to save." Sarah, holding her friend's hand, answered with a glimmer of hope, "We still have a chance. We can still fight." But deep down, both knew that this fight was against something far beyond human understanding, a dark game in which death always seemed one step ahead. The ICU was almost empty. Among the staff and patients, only Emily and one other colleague remained, Mark, the maintenance technician who had become her ally in the search for answers over the past weeks. They knew time was running out. Every moment brought a new shadow of danger. The cycle of death seemed unbreakable, relentless in its precision. Mark proposed a daring plan, to temporarily shut down all the machines in the ward to force a complete reset of the electrical system. Something never tried before. It was a huge risk, but perhaps their only chance to interrupt the fatal sequence. As they prepared the shutdown, the tension was palpable. The hallways, lit only by emergency lights, felt like echoes of a place forgotten by time. Emily felt the weight of silence as a living presence. At any moment, the lights could go out for good, and what would come next was beyond her understanding. When they finally pressed the button cutting the power, everything plunged into darkness. The monitors went black, the alarms ceased, and an absolute silence took over. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Hope seemed to be reborn. But then, a sharp snap broke the silence. The system came back on, the lights flickered to life, and a final breath escaped from an empty room, where no one should have been. Emily and Mark exchanged glances, aware that this night was far from over. The invisible enemy was still there, perhaps now closer than ever. They were the last survivors. And the race against fate was not over yet. Months had passed since that dark night in the ICU. Emily tried to move on with her life. She changed cities, switched hospitals, seeking distance from the past that relentlessly haunted her. But fate is patient, and cruel. In her new routine, small signs began to appear. A lamp flickering for no reason, the clock stopping at 3:15 a.m., the heavy silence settling in before a bad feeling. Emily felt, once again, that invisible presence. Something watching her from the shadows, waiting for the right moment. On a rainy night, alone in her apartment, the phone rang. It was a call with no voice, just static, a distant whisper from the past. She stood up, heart tight. When she turned to close the door, a sharp snap echoed down the hallway. A muffled scream was lost in the silence. And then, everything went dark. Fate, patient and cruel, had finally completed its cycle.